Chargers. Touchdown, UCLA.
With USC great and NFL stud, Frostee Rucker.
The Trojans back in front.
And LAFB founder Ryan Dyrud on the Believe Podcast Network and LAFBnetwork.com. This is your destination for Los Angeles football.
What is up, Los Angeles? Welcome into another episode of the LA Football Podcast here on the LA Football Network, LAFBnetwork.com. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Stitcher, Amazon, Google Play, wherever you listen to podcasts. We are. Just search Believe in LA Football, as we are also on the Believe Podcast Network. Excited about today's show. Cut day was yesterday. You know, big day for all these players. Sad day for some. You know, the dream doesn't end when you get cut, it just begins. But momentous happy day for others that make that 53-man roster. So we're going to get all into that today for the Rams and Chargers and give our thoughts and analysis. Today's show, as always, brought to you by betonline.ag. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 100%. You heard that, 100% welcome bonus. Usually a 50%. Today it's a 100%. Take advantage of their opening day super promo. Make a bet on the Thursday, September 9th season opener between Super Bowl champion Buccaneers and the Dallas Cowboys. And if you lose, your wager will be refunded. Let me say that again. If you lose your bet, your wager will be refunded up to $25 for new customers only when signing up with using the promo code NFL100. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports. That's betonline.ag. Head there today. Can't beat that. And bet on your Rams and Chargers. Rams Sunday Night Football host the Bears. Chargers play the Washington football team. Let's get some bets going on that. See what's going on. So, but yeah, I'm going to have Josh Kollack join me for our Rams portion of the show. He is a writer right here on the LA Football Network. You can find all of his work at LAFBnetwork.com. And, you know, so he has an analysis article up today featuring these 53 players and what they mean for this Rams roster. So we'll get into that. And then after that, I will quickly go through the Chargers roster stuff, as, you know, they obviously made some moves that did not make fans very happy. I'll just say that much. Fans were not very pleased with some of the moves. And unfortunately, a lot of fans, at least on Twitter, who were very high on this coaching staff, became very sour very quickly. And I will caution you to pump the brakes. While cuts are not easy and you get fan favorites in camp and from years prior, sometimes schematically, things change. And you see a guy one season, and maybe the role is different the next season. Now, there was definitely one head scratcher for me, which I will get into. But overall, this is not the end of the world. Trust me on that. Not the end of the world. Still have faith in this coaching staff and Brandon Staley. But anyway, we will start with the Rams. Before we get into it, I don't know if you've heard, but apparently former NBA player Lamar Odom may be returning to professional basketball in Spain soon. Interesting. But he's been taking a new product he owes all that credit for, and it's called Balance 7. Balance 7 is a pH balancing alkaline supplement drink. You know, there's a lot of wear and tear for these professional athletes, and they need to recover quickly, and that's why products like Balance 7 help. So head to balance7.com. That's the number 7. So balance, the number 7.com. Use the code BELIEVE, B-L-E-A-V, for free shipping. Balance7.com and use the code BELIEVE for free shipping. If he did it, you can too. Don't matter if you're an athlete, stay-at-home dad, stay-at-home mom, just go to the park, play soccer, whatever it is. Balance 7 is going to help you recover and get back to normal quicker. So let's jump into this conversation with Josh Kollack, see how these Rams did as we give our thoughts. Let us know what you guys are thinking after you listen to the conversation. Hit me up on Twitter at Ryan Dyrud, LAFB. We'd love to hear what you're thinking about this new Rams squad heading into the regular season. All right, Rams fans, as mentioned in the intro, going to be joined by one of our beat writers here at the LA Football Network, covering the Rams, does a myriad of other things. Repping the Rams jersey, joining me with the great bookcase background, Josh Kollack. What's going on, brother? How you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
Good. Is that a big Witt jersey?
That's a big Witt jersey, man. I played
Nice.
O-line, D-line in high school, so I've got an Aaron Donald, and I had to get an Andrew Whitworth. I have a Jalen Ramsey too, a number 20 before he switched. But
Okay.
yeah, I figured I'd rock the O-line today.
I love it. Big Witt. Yeah. The guy, the man. But dude, yeah, happy to jump on with you. Obviously talk to you a bunch and you do great work for us and great writing. So if you haven't yet, make sure to follow Josh on Twitter at real_Kylo. And you can find all of his writing and work at LAFBnetwork.com. He will be putting out a roster, analysis article here in the coming hours, or whenever you listen to this, it might be already out. But today we're going to just talk a little bit through this initial 53-man roster, as the cut down day was yesterday. Tough day for a lot of players, and a great day for a lot of other players that see their dreams truly come to fruition as they make the main roster. So Josh, talking about these Rams, though, let's just get right into it. I feel like nothing crazy in terms of surprise cuts, just because we knew how deep this team was. We knew how hard it was going to be, these decisions to be made. But who to you was kind of the biggest surprise? We were like, oh, maybe that's one I didn't see coming.
Yeah, so I got to say that my biggest surprise was Dante Dion, mostly because he's been on the practice squad for a few years now, and he seems to always ball out in preseason. And I think that it was just kind of surprising because he didn't really get a whole lot of run during the preseason games. And that just, I think everybody kind of thought that anybody who wasn't getting run in the preseason was like a roster lock. And I remember on Twitter seeing a bunch of people kind of question that, like, why isn't he playing? Like, he's not a starter. He's not. And, for them to kind of cut him was a little bit surprising. And so I'd say that's the biggest surprise to me.
Yeah, I don't know if it was another one of those coaching chess moves where they don't see him as quite good enough as a game day guy to dress, but they love him around the organization. They want him on the practice squad yet again. And they knew if they played him, though, he might get snatched up. I don't know if that's what they were thinking. Just like, hey, you're a P squad guy for us. We don't want to lose you, but we don't want to showcase you and get you elsewhere, which, I not super cool for him, but maybe that's what they're thinking. I don't know.
Yeah, I kind of alluded to that too, commenting back and forth to people who were talking online and everything. And I honestly think that's what they were doing. I think he's a guy, obviously, he's been in the organization a few years now. And so they know what they have in him. Like, they see him in practice and camp and all that stuff. And so I think it was really just about stashing him on the practice squad, finding a way to hide him. And somebody mentioned to me, that play where he got burned, I think it was by Cortland Sutton on a really good route during the Broncos game. And hey, even better, like that's the play that's
we're not losing him now.
Everybody's mind and team's mind. And so now it's like, so I don't know, maybe Dante Dion purposely did that so that he could help the Rams out. I don't know.
Maybe. So hopefully we will see him back in the practice squad, which we'll get to eventually. Some guys we think could be back. For me, I think the biggest, again, I don't think there's a lot of shocks. I know Micah Kiser is a big name, but we knew that of these five backers, it could go any way. Of these five inside backers, like I've talked many times, that I could see any of these five being cut, except for Ernest Brown, just because he was just drafted and he was highly drafted. So I figured he was pretty much a lock because I want to see him through. But I was not going to be surprised if any of them were cut or any of them stayed. And being there at training camp and seeing that it was, Kenny Young and Troy Reader were basically the insurmountable starters. Like, they played all the 1 reps in training camp, didn't play at all in preseason. Then Traven Howard, they just were trying to get his feet wet back after the injury. It kind of seemed like it was trending that way. Did that surprise you at all, seeing Micah Kiser?
No, not at all. I think in my original prediction way back when, I predicted Micah Kiser being the odd man out. Injuries throughout his career, struggling in coverage. And honestly, like, as much hate as some of the Rams linebackers get, they're good in the roles that they're good in. They may not be all around linebackers. They're not going to be Pro Bowlers, but they're good in specific roles. And so I think, the best ability is availability. And Kiser's had some injuries, and we can say that about Traven Howard as well. But last year, the Rams, it had been reported that, he was tabbed to be a starter. So, and I think his athleticism and ability in coverage, which is very different from the other Rams linebackers, kind of led me to think Kiser would be the odd man out, especially with the addition of Ernest Jones, which a lot of people kind of compared his game a little bit to Kizer anyways. So, yeah, I mean, I wasn't too surprised about Kizer. And I think McVay even said, he expects him to probably get picked up on waivers. So
I would assume so. If any team's been hit with injuries and just being that he was a starter last year, I would assume he'll get picked up by some potentially linebacker needy team. Going down, just kind of wrapping up the cuts, and then we'll get into actual who made the team. Ernest Brown, the draft pick this year, was kind of in a tough spot because they were having him learn two positions, being that in an outside kind of edge guy and also on the defensive line. So going back and forth. So I'm sure he's a guy they for sure want to get back in the practice squad, because if they saw that potential of him learning two positions, that's the guy I want to keep. Do you think he makes it through waivers, though? Was he able maybe to not showcase enough where you think he's safe on this team, or you think someone picks him up?
I think he'll make it through waivers. I think he was a player to me when I scouted him, because I actually watched his tape in college, and I think he was a pretty good run defender in college. As a pass rusher, he was kind of a one-trick pony. He was just a power rusher, just kind of had a bull rush, and that was it. And we saw that in preseason when he played, when he had opportunities to rush the passer. It was just kind of bull rush in there, no other real pass rush plan. And I think the only surprise is that A, he was a 5th-round pick, and B, that through camp and everything, we kind of heard the Rams – we're talking like, oh, he's going to fill that Morgan Fox role. And then so to see him cut, you're like, oh, okay, what exactly happened there? I think it's just a matter of they want to get him reps at D end and outside linebacker. I think they want to develop that pass rush plan. He's got some natural ability. I think he just needs to be refined and develop a little bit. I think that he didn't quite show enough in preseason. I don't think any teams are going to be scrambling to sign him or anything like that. So I think I think he'll clear waivers and end up on the practice squad.
I think so. I think that's definitely their intention on that. And as it should be, because it's a numbers game at some point. You just don't have room for all these guys. And it's, unfortunately, if I'm not mistaken, he was the only draft pick not to make the team. But again, I think we'll see him back in the practice squad and see his development, hopefully. And hopefully they'll be able to kind of carve out a specific position for him. But last two guys we'll talk about, and then we'll get on to who made the team and potential guys to go after if they decide to make any more cuts and add guys. But Tristan Jackson, who was kind of the receiver darling of this training camp, had a great preseason, or at least a start until kind of got injury riddled. But I mean, this receiver core was just so deep. It was going to be such an uphill battle to make this make this team as a receiver, regardless, unless you were like the unquestioned return man, which seems like that might be Tutu Atwell now. So kind of got beat out on that. So was that surprise to you at all that they kept Ben Skowronek, who was the draft pick, instead of him, or do you just think the upside and his size gives them a little more versatility than what Tristan Jackson could do?
Yeah, so first off, shout out to Ben Skowronek. I'm a Notre Dame fan, so I the more Notre Dame players on the LA Rams, the better for me. As far as Tristan Jackson and also JJ Koski, he had a pretty good preseason as well. I think I was up in the air. It was a toss-up for me, especially with Skowronek being a draft pick, albeit a 7th rounder. I think that his size, his ability as a blocker, and ultimately I think what set him apart was his special teams ability. And when you're fighting for a last roster spot, that sixth receiver, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for that special teams ability, because they don't anticipate Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, Deshaun Jackson, Van Jefferson, and Tutu Atwell going down with injury and having to say like, okay, bring in the undrafted free agent. Yeah. With that said, I think Jackson absolutely deserves to be on a 53-man roster. Selfishly, I hope he makes it back to our practice squad, but I mean, it wasn't a surprise to me. I think that special teams value is just something that Jackson doesn't have, although I think he's a superior receiver. Yeah. And, it tells you something, because Skowronek missing so much of training camp with the injury and Jackson, really shining. The coaching staff must have thought, okay, this is kind of Jackson's ceiling. We see how good he can be. But Skowronek showed us enough at Notre Dame in his tape that we really want to see this through and see what he can bring. And as you mentioned, the special teams ability as that as well. So, I think that, again, you're fighting for a wide receiver 6 spot. So it's not like you're fighting for a starting job.
but it does speak volumes to his potential that they're willing to keep him, even though not playing much in the training camp and preseason, versus a guy that really shined. And lastly, and again, this is just a bummer because it was just a numbers game, but Justin Lawler, who became after that week 1 matchup with the Chargers, had a dominant performance, was basically unblockable. And after that week, I remember so many, Twitter heads and analysts saying, okay, well, he's a lock for this team now. Like, who's the odd man out on the edge? Because they're keeping Lawler, and unfortunately, he was the odd man out. Does that just come to draft prowess, having guys like Obo and Terrell Lewis ahead of him, even though they can't seem to stay healthy? Or is it just the physical traits, even though he's shined in a preseason game, just doesn't quite have it to go up against, top tier tackles in the NFL, you think?
Yeah, I'm honestly not really sure. He obviously showed us what he's capable of against second and third stringers.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I remembered early on in camp, they were talking about he was the man that was coming in right after Leonard Floyd. And so I think I was a little bit surprised because it kind of sounded like he was already tabbed for that. I have a feeling that what happened is that as camp and as the preseason practices and games went on, I have a feeling that Chris Garrett got more and more comfortable and started to play faster.
Mm-hmm.
And then he flashed in that preseason game, and it was like, okay, now we have a decision to make. And then against the Broncos, Chris Garrett, not as much as the previous week against the Raiders, but against the Broncos, he flashed some more, and Justin Lawler didn't. And so I think they said, hey, this guy was a draft pick this year. After these performances, he's not making it through waivers. Maybe Justin Lawler does because his injury history, because he hasn't really shown anything against starters in the league. So I was a little bit surprised. I thought the Rams were going to keep like 6 edge rushers and cut, only roll with like 5 safeties. But obviously other players forced them to keep more safeties. So I think, like you said, it's always just a numbers game. It's a good problem to have. I mean, I can remember the years where the Rams were the ones that were looking at everybody's waiver cuts like, hey, how can we get a little bit better by adding somebody else's scraps? And now other teams are doing that with us. So,
yeah, it's a good problem to be in, good problem to have as an organization. When you unfortunately don't see guys make it through, but you're like, okay, good for you. You made it to a 53-man roster. You live out your dream, and obviously that means we're drafting well and signing good undrafted free agents. So, and you mentioned Chris Garrett, man. I'm so stoked about this kid. I love the draft pick. Obviously there wasn't a lot of tape on him. Everyone was scrounging for Concordia tape after he was drafted, trying to figure out who he was. It's just not there. But the production was unbelievable. And, I've talked many times that I thought there was absolutely going to be a learning curve jumping to the NFL talent pool. But when you have that kind of production, eventually it's going to catch up. Like, you're obviously an athletic specimen, obviously have the talent to do it. There's just a little bit of a learning curve jumping to that, that level of competition. And that learning curve didn't last very long for Chris Garrett. He exceeded expectations pretty quickly. So love that he's on this roster. Thinks he absolutely deserves it. I kind of thought he was a lock from the beginning, just because, not because he was a draft pick, but because when you take a flyer on that, you obviously see potential that you could see a ceiling much higher than what other players maybe have. Right. And now we'll see that play out. So tough to see Lawler go, but if it was between him and, Chris Garrett, I think they made the right choice there. But yeah, let's talk about the guys that made it. The team that we have right now, which is, I like to emphasize, initial 53-man roster, because this can change a lot even before week 1, just 10 days away now. But as of now, the 53-man is set, and the Rams decided to keep 3 quarterbacks. I know a lot of people always have opinions on this, but the Rams kind of played their hand when they decided to play, Bryce Perkins for 2 straight games, 8 straight quarters, that they were either going to get to keep him or not. It was their choice to keep him on the roster or let him go to some other team. Do you like them keeping 3, or do you wish they would have just rolled with 2 and had another roster spot for someone else?
I love that they kept 3. Bryce Perkins, I mean, if you want to talk about somebody becoming enamored with a player through preseason, I mean, Bryce Perkins is just his ability to come in and go through his progressions, use his athleticism to, escape from rushers and make plays with his feet. One, it's something that we haven't seen anybody in the number 16 jersey do in a long time.
Yeah.
And,
Well
I love John Wolford, but I honestly think that he's probably a career backup. And I think Bryce Perkins flashed an ability to potentially someday be somebody's starter. And I think that the game against the Broncos showcased that more than anything, because we finally saw him do that against starters.
Yeah.
And he handled it like you expect a starter to handle it. At no point did he ever throughout preseason look rattled. And for a guy who came in as an undrafted free agent last year and then missed having a preseason to get those reps, get those opportunities to put film out there, and then to come in and just like take over like he did this year, I'm thrilled that he's on the 53-man roster. I think that there's no way he would have ever made it through waivers. I think the Seahawks would have scooped him up as soon as they could, if they could.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's a good point. I think he would be better than a, Geno Smith or Sean Mannion, who they have right now. It's always interesting because I think keeping 3 quarterbacks is weird because, the third guy essentially is not going to do anything unless, tragedy strikes. And in that case, this team would be in a lot bigger trouble, you'd think. I mean, but from what we saw from Bryce, maybe not. But I look at it too, that yes, he flashed the potential there. And it's always hard because we have these preseason warriors every year that you're like, oh man, that guy's going to be a starter. And then in 2 years, sometimes they're not even in the league anymore. I'm not saying that's going to be him, but a guy like Kyle Sloter, I can think of, who was great in preseason and now can't find a job for some reason. But I think what's even more interesting is the fact that next year, John Wolford is going to be a free agent. And so that's something that they could maybe be thinking as well. As we know, Sean McVay loves John Wolford, but it's a crazy backup quarterback market nowadays. And you see these guys making 10, 11, $12 million. Rams are always strapped for cash. They cannot be paying their backup quarterback that kind of money. So that could be something else they're thinking, you know what, at least we're set at the backup, whether we can re-sign John or whether we have Bryce for the future as our backup. At least we feel comfortable with either one. So that's another, I guess, thought process as well.
Yeah, and I also think, and I'm not saying this is anything that they're thinking or planning or anything, but we've seen backup quarterbacks go for pretty solid trade packages before. Teams get desperate for quarterbacks and will throw picks and money at anybody who looks halfway decent. I think it was, who was it? Was it the Arizona Cardinals that had traded for Kevin Cobb? Or I can't remember if he went to the Eagles or if the Eagles traded him. I can't remember now anymore. But
yeah, I know your situation you're talking about. Yeah.
And he fetched
that was a long time ago.
Yeah, he fetched like a 2nd-round pick and a starting cornerback.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, you never know. Like maybe week 17 this year, the Rams already have, home field advantage locked up. And they're like, okay, we're going to let Stafford sit and play Wolford. Maybe he tears it up in that game, and all of a sudden next year, some team's throwing a 2nd-round pick for John Wolford.
Hey,
or
things have happened.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that will happen, but that's another angle to kind of play there. So
yeah, it'll be interesting. So, but anyway, I think it's. Yeah, I'm mixed on it because I love Bryce Perkins, so I did not want to see him go. But I'm always mixed on 3 QBs versus an extra roster spot. But I'm not upset by any means. So,
and I think another aspect is that with COVID, you never know. I mean,
true. That still is around. Yeah.
What if it's a big game coming up and Matthew Stafford ends up on the COVID list?
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, you don't want to have to sign a street free agent.
No. Well, I think it, in a sense, maybe speak volumes to Sean, and I know he's one of the best coaches in the game, but just continuing to mature and get better, realizing back to that playoff game when, he had an injured Jared Goff, was starting Wolford. Wolford gets injured on the first drive, and now he's playing his injured quarterback and has no one else, like Cooper Kupp or Johnny Hecker was the reserve. So maybe that thought process, like we need a little better, like we're going for the Super Bowl. We need to make sure we have all our ducks in a row, have every potential if anything strikes. So yeah, that I get. And the more and more I think about that, that just makes more and more sense in case anything like that happens, especially with COVID protocols still in what they are. But speaking of roster spots and, maybe taking one away from another position group, the running back room, only keeping 3 with, Darrell Henderson, who has injury history, Sony Michel, who they just traded for, so we haven't even seen yet, and has had an up and down career. And then Jake Funk, the 7th round pick, who I love, but also has injury history. Do you think, I'll just say this, I think they'll end up adding a 4th at some point, whether it's before week 1 or, right in that beginning of the season. But B, does that concern you that they only have 3 and all 3 have some concerns over them, or you feel confident in that room right now?
I want to start off. I think that I feel confident in their abilities. I'm obviously a little nervous because they all have a little bit of a history of being banged up.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the Rams' initial plan was to keep Xavier Jones on the roster.
Yeah.
Obviously, unfortunately, he tore, I don't know if he tore his ACL, but it sounds like he's got to have surgery. So I'm assuming not his ACL, his Achilles.
Yeah.
So very unfortunate. I think that was their initial plan. I too think they'll scoop somebody up on waivers or something and get a 4th back in there. I also, I can see the angle of, they've picked up a street free agent at running back before and played well that way.
Yeah.
I mean, in this passing league these days, and how Sean McVay likes to throw the ball, especially now that he's got Stafford, you never know. I mean, there's lots of players out there that he probably has some familiarity with that won't be on a roster, and you never know. You can pick them up and use them for 2 games and then cut them and bring your guy back in or whatever. So, but I think they'll add a 4th guy here pretty soon.
Yeah, I would assume so. Or obviously, they'll definitely have 1 or 2 on the practice squad that they won't be game ready, but if something happens, they can bring up at some point in the season. But love all 3 backs. I was honestly pretty big on the Sony Michel the trade. Even though wasn't totally utilized in New England, averaged like 5.6 yards per carry last year. So can still bring the juice and still have a nice change of pace and the versatility that he has to this running back room. I think they have three very capable backs. Now it's just a matter of keeping them on the field. So, because we want to give Stafford some 100-yard games, right? That's the goal. Want to give him some 100-yard performances. And speaking of the guys that will help that happen, the offensive line. So we got to talk about the offensive line, the big uglies, the hog mollies up front. First off, Alaric Jackson, the lone undrafted free agent to make the team out of Iowa. 2 years ago, this was a guy playing, the bookend of Tristan Wirfs. A lot of people were talking, not better than Tristan, but a guy that could have gone in the draft too and been drafted that same year. Decided to go back to school and then ended up, slimming down, and now he's trying to put weight back on. Obviously, they love the potential there. They love the ability that he has to potentially be a future bookend piece, albeit when Whitworth retires or albeit down the line when Rob Havenstein, if they move on from him, But what do you think of that? Keeping Alaric Jackson over some of the other options out there?
I always thought they were going to keep Alaric Jackson. He was a guy that I loved in the draft. I thought he should have been drafted this year, despite having a down year because of the weight loss and all of that. When you put on his tape from the previous 2 years, I mean, the guy just looked, he looked like
he's an Iowa tackle.
He was an Iowa tackle. I initially, off of his 2019 tape, had him as like a 4th round pick. So when they got him as an undrafted free agent, I was like, you wait, he's going to add this weight back. He's going to work with Andrew Whitworth and Rob Havenstein and Carberry and end up being a monster. And when that happens, I don't know, but I'm thrilled that he made the roster. I always thought he would. So yeah, Iowa tackles, you usually can't go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, those Big Ten guys, especially from Iowa, tend to work out usually. I do want to mention Coleman Shelton is on the COVID-19 reserve list, so technically not released. He does not go against the roster limit as of now, but once he comes off that list, we'll see if they make a spot for him or someone else, as they currently have 9 offensive linemen. Were you surprised that they kept Bobby Evans? I know he's been a big talk of contention for Rams fans this preseason, and he had a pretty poor preseason. It was like week 2 against I always want to say Oakland, against Vegas, and And this is why I think PFF's lost a lot of credibility. They had him as like the highest grade offensive player for the Rams, which made absolutely zero sense because he was just getting obliterated by everybody. Does that surprise you they brought him back, or did that mean you just think they're that thin, or they just really do believe they can turn him around for the better?
I think they can turn him around for the better, at least as a reserve guy. Do I think at this point they're looking at him as the future at any position or any? No, I don't. I think they're like, he's familiar with the system. We're familiar with him. Until we see somebody who's just exponentially better, we're going to keep that familiarity on the roster. In terms of PFF, it's a great tool, but it cannot be used as the only thing. I mean, watching the tape to me is always the most important thing. Formulas always have flaws. And I think like he had the highest offensive grade and everybody was like, what?
Yeah,
like, there's no way.
Watching? Yeah.
He was definitely not the best player on the offense that game whatsoever.
Not even on the offensive line.
No, yeah. But when you look at it, he had a really high run blocking grade and his pass blocking grade was atrocious. And somehow that averaged out to, he was a good offensive lineman.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, I guess, sure, he opened some holes up, but he got the quarterback killed almost like a million times. I don't know what PFF was looking at, but somehow they got to fix that formula.
Very unsure about that. Talking to someone else, and we were like, "What?" We were like in mid conversation recording, and all of a sudden we like pulled that up, and I was like, "Wait a minute, what? Did I read that right? Like highest graded?"
Yeah, and I think with Bobby Evans, for me, I said this to somebody else at one point, but he looked really bad, and when he didn't look bad, he looked pretty decent, right? Like there were times where he flashed, even in pass protection, where it was like, okay, that was a solid rep. Like, okay, maybe he's turning the corner. I don't know. But his lows are really low. Like when he gets beat, it's like he's just holding a gate open saying, go hit the QB.
Yeah, be my guest. Yeah.
And so I think when you have those really low lows, it's hard to have confidence in a guy because Rams fans saw Sam Bradford get killed and ruin his career. And we saw Jared Goff get killed. And nobody wants to see that happen to Stafford. Like we're hopeful that he's going to lead us to the promised land. And so you don't want to have a guy like Bobby Evans come in at some point and God forbid, he completely blows an assignment and gets the QB killed. And now our season is in jeopardy. So
yeah, no, absolutely. And last thing for the offensive line, and then we'll talk a little defense before getting out of here. But only, like I mentioned, Coleman Shelton technically not released yet. He is on the COVID list, but the 9 that have been kept and are rostered in right now, only one true center, and that is Brian Allen. Austin Corbett obviously can play there, but is, the guard right now, the starting guard. Every center that gets released, I feel all of Twitter is just like, okay, here's a guy the Rams could go after.
Guilty.
Every single one. I'll put you on the spot. Is there a center, 2 centers, 3 centers you think the Rams put a claim in for and try to go after? Or do they, like they've been steady and true all offseason, they feel good about their guys?
Oh man. So there's some guys out there.
Like Skura from Miami is one that was released. There's a few, like, not that I mean, they were released for a reason, but maybe some good depth pieces.
Yeah, and I think so people have like joked around with me on Twitter before, like, guys, like you said, guys were cut for a reason. Like, you got to quit looking at these undrafted free agents or these cuts as guys who are going to come in and end up being good players. To that, I say Darius Williams. Like he was cut by the Ravens.
Yep.
He's an undrafted free agent, and like he is a top 10 corner in my opinion in the league right now. And probably going to get paid very handsomely in this next offseason.
Yeah.
We saw, and you see too, like players who don't initially do well with their teams and they get a change of scenery. I always say coaching matters. Like coaching matters probably more than anything in the world. When Austin Corbett was with the Browns, he did not look like a guy that would ever be a starter. After being a second round pick, like they were willing to give up on him and say like, yeah, it's never going to happen. And he comes to the Rams and all of a sudden is an above average guard. And, so it's always important to look at these guys and say, you know, this is what they're capable of. Obviously, they were cut for a reason, but maybe that reason was they just didn't gel with the coaching staff. Maybe it wasn't a scheme fit. So as far as guys that I'm looking at center, I've already mentioned on Twitter Lamont Gaillard. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm not sure. The Rams had initially put in a waiver claim on him, and he ended up getting scooped up by the Bengals, who obviously had higher waiver priority. Another guy I've seen mentioned and kind of looked into him a little bit more is Jake Brendel from the 49ers. They just cut him. Obviously, there's going to be some familiarity scheme-wise there. And he graded really well this preseason. So I'm not exactly sure why the 49ers cut him, but I think he might be an option. Those are guys at center. There's a lot of offensive linemen that I like that I would be willing to throw a waiver claim on, but at center, those would be my two guys right now.
Yeah, if the Rams do make a move and add anyone, I would think it would be at offensive line. But that's what we've all thought all offseason, and they've done nothing for the offensive line. So I'm done guessing that they're going to add someone, I think, because they'll end up probably adding another running back or like a special teams guy that plays receiver or something.
Right.
But we'll see. So, but yeah, they feel good about their offense. You know, we'll just do defense quickly because we already kind of touched on the inside backers, the edge guys, as we were talking about cuts. So let's just talk about the secondary real quick. Only 4 corners, 6 safeties, probably the deepest safety group in the NFL, in my opinion. One thing I want to say first, and then I'll get your opinion on it. Much like Brandon Staley's scheme last year, this new Raheem Morris scheme, which will have a lot of intricacies of Brandon Staley's scheme, but then he'll have his own flavor on it. This is a defensive back room, I always say, not necessarily a cornerback room and a safety room, because they all kind of work interchangeably. Yeah, they have their specific positions, but you're going to see Jalen Ramsey playing all over the place. He'll probably play deep sometimes. You'll have Darius Williams in the slot on the outside. So I don't think it's people, because I saw a lot of people, wow, only 4 corners. Like, we should have at least 6. Like, why so many safeties? But these guys can all play different spots. All your safeties essentially can play nickel if needed, specifically Terrell Burgess, who I think will play a lot of nickel. Yeah. But, Juju Hughes and J.R. Reed, I think, can as well. Not that they're going to be asked to do that, being the 5th and 6th guy on the roster. But so I'm not concerned at all about that. I see it as 10 defensive backs, not 4 and 6. But what were your thoughts on that when you initially saw the roster?
Yeah. I was a little bit surprised they only kept 4, mostly because I thought Dante Dion was a roster lock because of how he was utilized. We kind of talked about that. But in terms of being concerned about it, I'm not at all. I completely agree with you as far as the safeties being able to come down into the slot and do different things. Brandon Staley and Raheem Morris and the Rams defense are what I like to say. They're very malleable. They get a lot of guys. The Rams have been screaming versatility at multiple positions for years. Offensive line, they like guys to be cross-trained. Defensive backfield, they like guys who can play safety and corner, come down in the slot, play, they like safeties who can play box and coverage, that way they can constantly be moving around their front, confusing offenses, and putting guys in the best position possible every snap. So I'm not concerned with it at all. I think you're right. I think we're going to see a whole lot of Terrell Burgess in the slot, especially because although I think David Long is a guy who can play slot and outside, the Rams seem to really be talking about how well he was translating outside during the offseason. And I think Terrell Burgess is going to come in and I don't know if he'll be the starter there, but I think he and David Long will probably both get a lot of snaps there. So,
yeah, I agree. And when every day I was at training camp, Long was primarily on the outside. So I don't know if that was just, testing him to see how he would do, or that's where they really see him as. But I feel good about this group. I think it's a really good group and they'll be interchangeable. I love the word malleable you used. But man, I mean, we're like 10 days away from facing the Bears on Sunday Night Football. Like, I can't wait.
Facing Andy Dalton.
Can't wait even more. Like, it's going to be great. So, Josh Kollack, find him at real_Kylo on Twitter. All of his work at LAFBnetwork.com. Like I said, a roster prediction article is either up, depending when you listen to this, or will be up the next few hours if you listen to this immediately. So make sure to check that out as he gives all his analysis as well. But brother, glad you jumped on. We should have done this sooner. Glad you're on with me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. I'm happy to come on anytime.
All right, dude. We'll have you back on many times throughout the season. We can do some game reactions on Sundays too, some live stuff. So, but appreciate you. Enjoy the rest of your day. And yeah, I'll be talking to you soon.
All right, man. Take care.
All right. Big thanks to Josh. We'll have him on often, I'm sure, throughout the season. Just someone else for me to talk to and bounce ideas back to. So that'll be fun. But exciting news. Our pod is partnering with a new company called playactionpools.com this season to bring some interactive fun to the sport we love most. You'll be able to get in the action with our playactionpools.com football pick'em challenge, which is open to everyone. So here's how it works. You're going to sign up for the contest, Believe Football Pick'em. Again, it's at playactionpools.com, and then get your picks in each week. We're going to select the 10 highest profile games of the week between NFL and college football. Whoever gets the most picks correct each week will win a pair of electric sunglasses. Electric, that's the brand. And a pair of DC shoes. It's pretty sweet. It's free. Playactionpools.com. Believe Football Pick'em. BLEAV. And you just pick the winners. For NFL and college football, you have a chance to win sunglasses and a pair of shoes. So why not? Head to playactionpools.com and get involved in these office pools. All right, Chargers fans. So very, very in-depth reaction if you head to our Chargers Unleashed show. Those guys got really into it since, they just covered the Chargers. But I do want to touch on a few of my initial thoughts and some of these cuts, some of these guys that kept. I know this was a losing team last year, finishing 7-9. I know this is a brand new coaching staff, but this was a deep roster. A lot to be, I think, excited about with this team. And we saw that throughout training camp and all that. So I know some of these cuts will come as a surprise and you think it's the end of the world, but just shows that this coaching staff has a lot of faith in who they have right now on this roster. Now, we talked a lot about it in the Rams segment. Don't know if you stuck around, but keeping 3 quarterbacks is always interesting. I know there's like such a huge discrepancy between, people that support Easton Stick and people that don't. It's a huge parallel. But regardless if he was cut or Chase Daniel, one of them would have been picked up, I'm sure, by their team. They are, in my opinion, 2 of the better backups. I'm not saying the best, but when you look at these other rosters, they are 2 of the better backups in the league. So they wouldn't have made it through to be able to kept on. Now, again, maybe many of you think that, hey, 2 quarterbacks is fine. We'll pick up someone else's, released quarterback. As others, there's some other decent ones. Like, we don't need a 3. We'll just have them in the practice squad. I get that opinion. Absolutely. But this team feels that they wanted these 3 guys. It is what it is. I don't know if they see trade value down the line, or I know many times we've talked about Chase Daniel as being more, not necessarily kept for his ability on the field, but more his knowledge, his mentorship, his leadership, his proximity to Coach Joe Lombardi, who's the offensive coordinator. And I know they like Easton Stick for his versatility, his athleticism, and he did show, in my opinion, I know others disagree, but I believe he showed an improvement in his passing ability and pocket presence. Not a huge improvement in his pocket presence, but there was a little bit. We saw some good throws in preseason and some in training camp. Running backs, keep 4. I think this was the move. I know that the whole, training camp, it was basically everyone thought they would just keep 3. Most people, I think, agreed Joshua Kelly was probably the odd man out. I'm a huge Joshua Kelly guy. Had him on the show just, a little over a week ago. And that's not a reason to keep someone, but I really do believe in his potential. And I know we saw, not a great average per carry in preseason, poor blocking, maybe his poor audibles or call plays or something like that. Obviously, we've got to see more out of him, but he has improved in special teams. I do think he's a valuable asset to this team, and he's healthy. That's the biggest thing. Tristan Jackson, obviously, this team loves. They've given faith in, considering how often he's not available. But they believe that when he is available, he can be one of the better backs in the league, which he's proven. And Larry Roundtree, rookie, looked great. Like, he was going nowhere. I think he was going nowhere regardless because of how they felt with him coming out of Mizzou. But yeah, he looked good too. So that certainly helped. Receivers, this is where things got interesting. So the coaching staff talked about the depth of this room, how they believed is one of the best in the league. Quarterbacks talked about it. The receivers talked about it. They decided to only keep 5, We thought potentially they'd keep 7 even if that 7th guy was going to be a big special team contributor. They keep 5. The odd man out of that 5, who in week 2 of training camp was considered wide receiver 3, is T-Billy, Tyron Johnson. This was the big shock, I think, of the day. The big shock of the cuts. Because here is a guy that was explosive last year, had over 400 yards, some amazing plays, and just does something for this room that's the other players don't. I mean, Jalen Guyton is very similar, but I think Tyron Johnson has better hands. So I don't know if the coaching staff thought Jalen Guyton was a better overall route runner at this point, which we didn't see a ton last year, but maybe they viewed T-Billy as just more of just a vertical threat, whereas Jalen Guyton could give them more. I mean, in my opinion, I think they should have kept both of those two, but they decided to keep KJ Hill, who I haven't seen a ton from. I was not huge on him this training camp. I was bigger on, Austin Prohl, who was cut earlier. I still don't know that whole story. There was some injury that happened that really didn't get widely reported on. But yeah, what are your guys' thoughts on this? I know most people were not happy. Tyron Johnson not only proved himself, but kind of became a fan favorite. So this is the one where I have kind of my head scratching. The others I understand. Jason Moore had a good camp, but I get. Joe Reed hasn't done anything, so certainly get that. KJ Hill, there's something that they see in him that obviously they didn't see in Tyron Johnson. I don't know if it's the route tree, if it is his return ability, which we did see him return kicks in last year, and then we saw him in preseason do it. I mean, that must have been it, right? Must have been. So that was the big surprise for me of this round of cuts. But we'll trust the staff for now. See what they think. I mean, I'm surprised too, only keeping 5 receivers. But I'm sure they're going to add someone. So maybe they think that they're going to be able to get a guy that gives them that versatility. Because if Jalen Guyton goes down, they have 0 deep threat to stretch the field. I know Mike Williams is a deep threat, but he's not a speed deep threat, the jump ball deep threat. Josh Palmer and Keenan Allen are very similar in their route running ability and being able to go over the middle. KJ Hill's kind of a slot, short yardage guy that can, do some different things, but that's kind of his MO. So I'm curious to see where they go with that and if they add anyone else or if these are the 5 guys they go into week 1 with. That'll be interesting to see. Keep 4 tight ends. I don't think that's a surprise at all. Like all 4 of those guys. Keep 9 offensive linemen. I know a lot of people are upset they keep Trey Pipkins. I don't know if that's a Staley decision or if that was a straight up from Tom Telesco, who we know loves Trey Pipkins and wants to see him develop. Got burned a lot in preseason, but, it is what it is. They want to see it through and see how he is able to continue to develop. But there are a lot of good tackles out there. So I would tell you, Charger fans, do not be surprised if we see someone else cut in the coming days and another guy added on the offensive line. I think between Storm Norton and Trey Pipkins, yes, they're safe for now. That may change. That's no detriment to them, but that may change because there was some quality offensive linemen that have been released from other teams that the Chargers may decide, hey, let's add that guy and release one of these 2. Defensive line, Forrest Merrill, undrafted free agent, makes the squad. Kudos to him. Golf clap. One of 2 undrafted free agents to make it. So that is awesome. The rest is, not a big surprise. They keep 4 edge. Not a huge surprise to me. I like it. 5 backers, which, it's a fluid with this Brandon Staley base 3-4, but they don't run a lot of base, I should say. But yeah, I like all their backers a lot. And the other undrafted free agent to make it in that grouping was Eamon Ogbongbemiga, who had a phenomenal camp, was a phenomenal college player. I was honestly very surprised he went undrafted, so not a huge shock he makes his team. He was actually one of my predictions to make the team out of I think I chose 3 of the undrafted guys, and he was one of them. And so he made it. So kudos to him. That is awesome. Keep 6 corners and 4 safeties. So opposite of the Rams. Rams kept 4 corners and 6 safeties because that safety room was just so dang deep for the Rams, who can be very versatile. But the same thing, as I've said all offseason long, Charger fans, it's the defensive back room. It's not the cornerback room. It's not the safety room. Maybe they do. I'm not at the facility. Maybe they do watch tape separately. But as Brandon Staley has said many times, he sees them all as defensive backs. So you have 10 defensive backs, not only 4 safeties, not 6 corners, 10 defensive backs. So like the group they're going in with, I don't think there was any major shocks there in that grouping. I think we all kind of saw what was going to come to fruition there. And then the last one, and I don't want to call it the biggest one, but special teams. Tristan Vizcaino wins the kicking job for your Los Angeles Chargers. Thoughts on that? I mean, he was the best kicker in camp, best in preseason. But now the Chargers have another new kicker. I think I read somewhere it's the 7th new kicker since moving to Los Angeles. It's not ideal. Not ideal. But let me know your thoughts on that. I think it was the good move, just because I say it's not ideal having the 7th new kicker. I think it was the right decision. He was the better kicker. So now let's hope he can maintain that, have his confidence ready to go, and be the kicker this team has been lacking for many, many years. So that was a quick rundown of the roster for the Chargers. Like I said, if you want really in-depth, listen to our other podcast on the LA Football Network, Chargers Unleashed. Those guys got really into it. But I just wanted to give a few thoughts. The other thought I want to give, lastly, I haven't talked to him in a while, but one of my first interviews when doing this show was of Cortez Broughton, who was out of Cincinnati, came to my apartment to do the interview. We talked to his agent, said, hey, we're this new podcast, cover LA football. Love to interview your client, Cortez. He was the 7th round draft pick that year. And his agent said, yeah, where do you want to do it? I'm like, oh, we can just do it remote. And he's like, oh, well, he's down to meet you. Where are you at? And so I told him where I live. He's like, okay, yeah. Here's his number. Give him a call. Called him up. He was like, yeah, I have some friends that way. I'll come by. What time do you want me there? Came to my apartment, sat in my living room. We broke bread, did the show. So always has had a special place in my heart. We saw him at training camp that year. Immediately came up, shook our hands, said what up. So it was really bummed to see him get released. I hope he can get brought back to the practice squad, but I'm also rooting for him to get picked up and be able to make a 53-man roster because I think he's a very solid player. This is just a deep defensive line. And Christian Covington played phenomenal. And obviously Forrest Merrill showed some stuff in the running game that this coaching staff loved. And that's why they went that direction. And, you have Linval, Justin Jones, and Jerry Tillery, who are your mainstays there. So, a deep room. Hard to make that 5. But love Tez. So shout out to him. Hopefully he's back on the practice squad. But I also kind of partially hope he makes a 50-man roster because I think he's good enough to be. He's a good player. Big heart. Big heart. So, anyway, thank you all for listening to the LA Football Podcast here on the LA Football Network. Brought to you by Brewery X, as always. Our friends at Brewery X, located in Anaheim, California, on the La Palma Beer Trail, right near Anaheim Stadium and the Honda Center, off the 57. Beautiful beer garden, gigantic brewery, 30 beers on tap, 10 hard seltzers. Tell them the fellas at LAFB sent you. They'll probably give you a discount, honestly, if you go in there and say, hey, Ryan from the LA Football Network said to come check you out. I'll probably be like, oh, yeah. All right, here's a little discount. But go check them out. They also sell their beer at Trader Joe's, Total Wine, Bevmo, pretty much anywhere you get your alcohol in the Southland. Brewery X, our friends. Your friends are my friends. What am I trying to say here? You are my friends. There we go. Thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen, whether it's audio on a podcast platform or video on YouTube. Certainly appreciate it as we help continue to grow the brand and give you the best Los Angeles football content here in LA. We've made some great strides. I'm so proud of what we're building, and we couldn't do it without you, our listeners, readers, supporters. Hopefully we can interact even more as game days are just around the corner. I'll be back on Friday right here on podcast or on YouTube, but also on AM 1090, the mightier 1090 at 5 o'clock. Make sure to tune in to that. Appreciate you all. Enjoy the rest of your week. We'll talk soon.